Hi, today we're going to look at this idea of what truth is and how we can best understand it. So to start off, there's a story that philosophers often talk about the elephant and the blind men. And so in the story, there's an elephant standing there and a bunch of men are blindfolded feeling around the elephant trying to figure out what animal this is. And so the person up front feeling the tusk says it's probably a sphere because it looks and feels like that. The person on top is feeling the ears and how they move air and says it's a fan because that's what it feels like. And then the person at the bottom feels the trunk, it says it's probably a snake. The person feels the leg and says it's round and sturdy, it's a tree. And the person up top says it's flat and sturdy, so it must be a wall. And then the person at the very end says it's probably a rope, feeling the tail of the elephant. And so this story is often tossed around by philosophers to say that this is essentially what religions do. They just kind of look at this elephant and make their best guesses. And so, since we all don't know anyways, that you might as well just accept other religions. Your religion isn't better than others. They might have a different view, touching a different part of the elephant, and that's okay. But I think this idea is mistaken in that this picture and what the people are actually feeling really is an elephant. So if someone came up and had more information than these people and weren't blindfolded and could see the thing, they'd say like, oh yeah, that's an elephant. That's why you feel this and you feel this, and would make the most sense out of the evidence that they have. And so this idea of truth is something that Cambridge philosopher Frank Ramsay talked about quite a bit. And he believed that making a statement called P and to assert that P is true was to say the same thing, and I would agree with him. But he also believed that saying is true was redundant, which led him to believe that there is nothing in truth. And so I think he really missed the point there, because if there was nothing in truth, then the statement that there is nothing in truth would be true, making that a self-defeating statement that's full of nothing in his view. And so even his case shows that there is a truth, because if there was nothing in truth, then that would be true, which would make truth something. And so it more reasonably seems to me that this case and his idea of saying P and P is true is the same thing gets at the idea that truth is so foundational that it's something we can't escape and something that's assumed from the very beginning. After all, the truth, when Ramsay says the statement P, he's already stating that it's true. And so P would only be in question later if it was shown to be false by the evidence. And that's why asserting P and asserting that P is true is the same thing. Because asserting P in the first place only makes sense if you believe P to be true. Otherwise, you're just lying. And so I think this is really interesting. And while I disagree with his point on it, I like his observation because it seems to show that there is a basic desire in everyone to know the truth, as it's assumed from the beginning and normally isn't questioned unless evidence comes up that contradicts a claim, and then you think, that might not be true. And so there are a few different ways that people define the word truth. And what's interesting is even asking what is truth, the question we're trying to answer today, it already assumes that there's such a thing as of truth. After all, if you're watching the video and want to know what is truth, do you want me to give you the true answer or the false answer? I think you're going to want the true answer, but that just shows you that there's such a thing as truth that we really desire. And so one theory about the definition of truth that's in contrast to what Ramsay believed is what philosophers call the correspondence theory of truth. And this theory states that an assertion or claim is true if it corresponds to the way that things really are in the real world. And so in this theory, there's a distinct separation between the way that people talk about the world or believe things about the world, and separately the way the world really is out there external to us. And so then what people say about the world may or may not line up with what they claim, and that's how you define whether something is true or false. If what people say lines up with the real world, then it's true, and if what people say does not line up with the real world, then that claim is false. And so this is a good theory of truth. And so another theory about the definition of truth is called the coherence theory of truth. And this theory says that a proposition is true or false depending on how well it fits into our fundamental beliefs about the world. And so this is seen in our understanding of logical fallacies and the so-called laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction. Basically, something can't be true and not true in the same way at the same place in the same time. It has to be one or the other. And so these laws are fundamental beliefs about the world, and they use logic and reasoning to get there, and we can use these to help us determine if other claims are true, to show that if something doesn't make logical sense, then it's probably not true. However, not all conclusions that have logical fallacies, not necessarily the law of non-contradiction, but other logical laws, just because you have a logical fallacy and it doesn't come out to a logical conclusion doesn't mean that you're necessarily false. Because something can happen that you wouldn't expect logically to happen, but if that still lines up with the way the world is external to you and the way you interact with the world, then it's still true. And another problem with this theory is that this definition of truth assumes a lot. It assumes the truth of these fundamental beliefs in the first place, such as the laws of logic. It assumes that the laws of logic are true as a definition of truth. But since we don't have a definition of truth, we can't use truth in our definition of truth to explain what truth is. So this theory is helpful sometimes, but it doesn't explain everything that needs to be said about truth. And so we, at a minimum, need an additional definition of truth to supplement this definition to really understand what truth is. And so another definition of truth that philosophers use is pragmatism. And this is just what truth is what works. And this is really common in our culture. People will tell you, well, that's true for you, but that's not true for me. Essentially, that's what works for you, but that doesn't work for me. So don't force your beliefs on me because they're not true for me. But this definition doesn't use an external source to measure what works and what doesn't work. And so it's hard to tell what is true and what is not true. Works is a very subjective term, and what works for one person may not work for another person. So this is a subjective or relativistic understanding of truth. But this definition of truth is also self-defeating, which is a problem, because it states that at all times, in all places, for all people, truth is based on what works for a person. But if it doesn't work for me, that truth is what works for each person to their own, essentially. And if I believe that truth is objective for all people at all places in all times, then I disagree with this definition of truth. But this definition of truth also isn't true for me. So this is a terrible definition of truth, because it's so subjective that if I don't want truth to be that, then that definition destroys itself already, just because I don't think it's true for me at that point in time. If it doesn't work for me, then that definition isn't true. So that shows us that we can't have this both ways. We need an objective definition of truth that goes outside ourselves and our feelings and what works for us to measure the truth about what people say and what people do. And so that just shows that truth is not subjective. There's an objective truth that's true for all places in all people in all places at all times. And so I believe that all of these definitions of truth, the correspondence theory, the coherence theory, and pragmatism, are helpful when looked at together to expand our understanding of truth. But the only one that really works completely all the time and is logically consistent is the correspondence theory of truth. And what's interesting is this idea of correspondence theory of truth is borrowed from in these other definitions to try to give us a logically consistent definition of truth, but only the correspondence theory is actually logically true in and of itself. And so truth is what corresponds to reality. That's the definition of truth. And this is also just sometimes said as the way the world really is. So the truth about the people looking at the animal in the story in the beginning is that the animal is an elephant. And people are studying this, and they can realize this just if they take off their blindfold and gather all the evidence. They'll realize the external truth, the way the world really is, and what they're really touching is an elephant. However, this question of truth does bring up some good ideas, and the story about the elephant, about the way to interpret evidence to come to true conclusions. And so check out this other video about that. Thank you, and I hope you will like and subscribe for more content that shares God's love through apologetics.